Welcome back to Wobblycogs Workshop. On this episode I'm going to put my planer thicknesser back together. A couple of months ago I took my planer thicknesser apart because the infeed and outfeed roller seemed to have seized, and indeed they had. As you saw in the other video, they'd galled together. But the parts have finally all arrived, and so it's time to put the machine back together. And here's what I've got to work with. As you can see, there's quite a few parts, more than I was expecting to have to put together, because basically to get to the headstock you've got to pretty much take the entire machine apart. And over these parts here are all stacked up as well. I mean the tables and the dust cover and stuff. Over here you can see the bits, the new pieces, the feed rollers, the main gear, the bushings. This is the cutter block assembly. You got just up here in this tub is just all the screws and nuts and handles and bolts and whatnot. That's the main power transfer, and then this is some of the guard system. I do have some instructions, but they're not very good. The drawings aren't vector drawings, they're sort of just pictures, so it doesn't matter if you blow them up, they're still a bit fuzzy. I've had a little look at the video of me taking it apart, and it looks like I need to fit the bushings, these bushings, onto these shafts. Now they come with some grease inside them, or what feels like grease, but it's incredibly thick. It's more like wax than grease. So after much studying of the video I shot taking this thing apart, and much studying of this slightly fuzzy diagram, I think I've got the right order to put things back together. I've got to get about 5 shafts all lined up with the respective holes, and push it all together. The only one I'm not sure about is this one. I think this one can go in after it's built, because this supports the like flip over dust cover for the chips when you're thicknessing, and it has a roll pin that holds it in place, and I think that can go in after, which is a good thing. All the other bits though have got to go in now, so I'm going to start by including this flat washer, and this, I think they call it a wave washer, and then this is the outfeed roller, so this is the outfeed side, and that is to slot in here. This is a spacer. It gives rigidity to the cutter head or cutter block. Now the infeed roller, the one that caused all the trouble, and of course everything's asymmetrical because it's all driven from this end. Now the fingers, and again this is asymmetrical, so it has to go in like this. Of course, if you get that the wrong way round, the fingers won't work. I had to think a little bit about this part because it can actually go in 2 ways. It can go in like that, but also it could have gone in like that, and both make a certain amount of sense. But this, looking at how it was put together before, that goes in like that. It's a cutter block guard or something. I'm not quite sure what it's there to do, to be honest. I think it maybe just is used to direct chips. But that's also how it's shown in the diagram, so I assume that's correct. Now I've got to try and get all of this up and lined up with that side, which is going to be easier said than done. So So we've got 4 socket head screws, M6x12s with washers, and I'm going to put them into this shaft and hopefully that will pull the whole assembly together a bit better, because at the minute it's a bit wobbly. Right, so it's nice and tight up on the end of the shafts. Fingers still move. They still rotate okay. Gutter block rotates okay. That's held firmly. I would say that is good. So I'm going to put this together in a slightly different order to I took it apart, because I took these out very early on. These are the springs that provide down pressure for the rollers. But it would be easier to install them now, so in they go. And all they are, they're just springs and they're held in by these sort of massive grub screws. This is one of those tools that look like a good idea, but it's absolutely awful because it just flops around. So you can never get a good hold on anything. Now you've got some M10 bolts that just go down into the casing. And plus these bolts have got to be put on before the sprockets, because there's no way you get a spanner in there otherwise. So I've got to get the dust shroud, I think, under there. This goes through this way, and then the washer goes in here. So the washer goes between the cutter block frame and the dust shroud. Now here's the tricky bit, you've got to hold the fingers out of the way while you push this through. So I've got to get that washer in there. Ah, nuts! Slip too far through and come out the other end. Right, so you can see the shaft is now in, and the 2 washers are in place as well. Now what I need to do is put that roll pin back in. Right, so this pin catches in a groove. It catches in like a little cutout in the top. It needs to go in a little bit further than that. Right, so that pin now stops the shaft going too far this way, and then there's this for engaging the safety cut-off mechanism, and it goes on the end of the shaft, and that then locks the shaft from heading in that direction. So I've got this little part which is a pin for the dust shroud, and the idea is it stops the dust shroud from sort of being pulled over. I'm not quite sure why it's necessary. I can't imagine it would ever come over by accident. The threads on this are completely knackered, totally chowdered up. So what I'm going to do is try running this this dye down them and see if I can just clean them up a little bit. No, that has cleaned up a tree. So I'm going to fit this side panel to the cutter block assembly. So now it's time for the pin that holds the dust shroud up. And then there's this cup that goes in. That's all right. You need these two to knot together. Yeah, it's a slightly odd arrangement, but it works. Right, so now I want to try and fit the safety interlock, but I suspect this is going to be a bit of a challenge. So this rocker arm, I think they call it, goes down there, and you can see that pushes the micro switch, whatever it is. And then this has to go in sort of like that, but the shaft comes up through that hole. Oh, well, that went better than I expected. Right, so I've readjusted this safety interlock cam to match what's in the photos. So at the minute it's about 45 degrees to the vertical. Now, the reason I've done that is because, well, for a start that's what it's like in all the photos, but I think I understand now why this arrangement is as it is. So when the dust extractor hood is down like that, it means you're in planar mode. So you're running wood across the tables at the top. Now, if you lifted the tables, you would want the machine to cut off because the cutter block is very exposed there. And lifting the tables pushes down on this. And you can see, you know, at this position, it's quite easy to push that down and engage the safety interlock. Now, when you lift the dust extraction hood into this position, that puts you into thicknesser mode. And in thicknesser mode, the tables have to be up and out of the way. So obviously, you would want the machine to still work. You wouldn't want the tables to be pushing this down. And as you can see, this drops down when this cam is turned around, and you can just about engage the safety interlock, but it's much more difficult. What I don't understand is why this isn't rotated a little bit further so the flat is completely against that, but all the photos show it in exactly this position. So I don't know, I think that might need adjusting again. I think it might need rotating just a little bit further, but we'll see. I don't like the way it flops about though. I mean, it just seems really dodgy. I'm sure you could think of something better than that, couldn't you? So now I'm going to fit the sprockets that drive the Infeed and Outfeed rollers. It starts with a washer, a backing washer. And a washer for the front, and then a self-locking nut. So I'm going to quickly put these onto this, it's called the cam bracket or something like that. I don't know if this should go on now, but it seems like a good idea to put it on now. It'd probably be easier to get into the machine later. Right, I've consulted the diagram, it was completely useless, and I've looked at my photos, and of course I haven't taken any photos of this for some reason, so I'm just going to have to do what looks to be about right. So I think this one's got to go on first, and it rides on this bushing. And of course this really should have a press, I guess, but I don't have a press. Apparently we've got a washer. I think it's the only washer that will fit anymore. $230. Retaining clip. So I just need to get the pliers. That is showing another retaining ring. There's no way there's another retaining ring going on there. Silly me, there's another shaft. So this shaft, I think, is how this bracket mounts. And there's a retaining clip on here to stop that falling out. Now we need to put in this shaft. So this hole is slightly oversized. So presumably that is so you can set the mesh between the teeth, the two pulleys. So it's got a washer. Apparently that's a sprung washer. It doesn't look very sprung to me. Right, so here's the inside of the machine. You've got this belt here which drives the feed rollers, and that transfers power to this, which in turn transfers power to this via a big step down, and then that transfers power to this chain, which then transfers power to these, which drive the feed rollers. You've also got a second power takeoff from the motor, which is this V belt, and that V belt drives this, which turns the cutter block. So that's how power is transferred. What I'm going to do now is connect this power transfer mechanism up there into this. Which is a bit tricky because it is on this shaft, which of course rotates. So you need to put an 8mm spanner. You need to put an 8mm spanner on this end of the shaft, and then reach up underneath, get this bolt on the back, and then do the bolt up like that, which is going to be really tricky, but well, we'll see. And this has to go through a hole in the front because it disengages the power. Got it. Well, that's finger tight. Right, so it's now finger tight, but obviously it needs to be quite a bit tighter because this is rattling around in the wind. What I'm going to do is put that belt loosely on there now, because I don't want to get to the point where I can't get it on. So what this mechanism does here, and I've got a lever out the side, and it disengages the feed rollers. I can't quite remember why you want to disengage the feed rollers. I think it's just so it doesn't sap power while you're in planer mode. But right, so now I've got to try and get a spanner up there onto the back of that nut and do this shaft up tighter. Ah, that's clever, and that acts as a brake there. So it pinches that between the two so it won't rotate. Except that is rubbing there. Oh, of course, the motor is raised right up at the moment, so this shaft here is too high by quite a long way, and that's going to provide a bit of extra tension on this, so that belt will drop down, it won't rub on here, and there'll be a bit more tension on that. I'm surprised that this didn't slip instead of shredding this gear when the bushings failed. I would have thought that would have slipped first, but perhaps not. Right, now I've got to try and get the other belts on. So I've just slacked off the idler pulley so that I can get the chain on. I didn't need to slacken it off to get the chain off, but that could be because the gear was damaged, so it's given a bit more play, but I've slid that right over, and that's much easier. That's obviously the right way to do it. I did try and get it on without, but it wasn't going to happen. So you don't want this, I think you don't want this too tight, you want it just a little bit of play in it. Can't remember why, but I remember chains aren't supposed to be super tight. Ah, no, there was something, wasn't there? It's got to not be too tight because, of course, these need to move up and down as the timber goes through. Well, I've got the chain tension to what I think is right. It feels maybe a little bit slack, and as you can see, when I turn it, this is the direction it turns, and it picks up, but I'm not entirely convinced by the pickup there. I mean, that's what it said, the maintenance note that talks about replacing these bushings says it should be slack, but it doesn't give a lot of information about how slack. I don't think it's going to come off. I've tried, walking it off there, and it wouldn't walk off, but it can just about. Yeah, you see, it's a bit. If it got out of alignment, I'm not sure that whether it could skip a tooth, which would not be good. Oh, I just remembered. I've got to fit a spring down on this, so I won't show that because it's too fiddly. So I fitted the spring down here. The spring puts tension on this lever, so you have to push it to disengage. It basically it's there to provide tension for this. Now I'm going to fit the main drive belt, the drive belt for the cutter block. Right, now I've got to lower the motor down, and to lower the motor down I need to slacken off the bolts on this side and then pull the motor towards me slightly, which is a surprisingly dangerous affair because it's the motor's quite heavy and it's very difficult to support. I think that's enough bits in to give it a fire up to find out if it works. Not sure about this yet. I think I'm probably going to have to take that down. So for the first time in about 6 years, let's put a bit of power to it. Excuse me if I'm a little bit nervous. Well, that's pretty good. Nothing blew up. I now need to fit the table for this end because this has a cutout which goes over a cam on the table, and the cam pushes the interlock. So until the table's in, I can't fit the cover. So the table has some grub screws for levelling, but I haven't touched them, and I'm now this table on its own is a bit dangerous because it's got no spring or anything to hold it. So the safety interlock isn't disengaging correctly. I think the table is a little bit too far that way. So here's an interesting problem. This safety interlock system wasn't working reliably when I had the table on. What was happening was the table was correctly engaging the interlock, but when I brought the chip collection hood over, it disengaged, but when I put it back, it wasn't correctly re-engaging. What was happening was this piece was getting jammed up under there because it has to ride on this larger diameter, and as you can see there, it's now jammed, whereas if I put it under there, it works correctly because it's touching this larger diameter. And a bit head scratching, I realised the problem is that something here isn't quite going far enough back. Maybe this isn't going far enough back here, but basically this cam, as you can see now, I've got a little gap here, and this is completely reliable now. It will always ride on this larger diameter, but that means that this shaft is no longer pinned exactly in place. So I can move the shaft that way slightly, and you can now see this roll pin here isn't fully engaging with the hood. And of course with this cam hard up against the cutter head side, again we can get the problem with the lock not correctly not riding on the larger diameter. So what I'm thinking I'll do is take this cam off and fit a washer. I think an M6 washer should fit nicely in there, and that should allow me to space this a little bit away from the cut head block, but also keep this shaft pinned in the correct location for the engagement of the roll pin. Well, that's the plan anyway. I think we're good there. So I'm going to put the table back and see if the mechanism works correctly. So I've given the safety interlock system a little play, test it, lifted the hood and stuff. It now is working correctly in so much as it doesn't bind up. All it needed was that space. All in all, I don't know. To be honest, I'm not that worried about not having the safety mechanism work because, this is a dangerous machine and you've got to treat it with respect. If you're lifting the table and exposing yourself to this and you're anywhere near this, then you're an absolute fool to be relying on that safety system. Just treat it with a great deal of respect and don't stick your hand in anywhere where it shouldn't be. And so now I'm going to fit this cover. This is belt cover, I think they call it. And next, I think I'm going to fit this table. Now I'm going to fit this piece, which ties the two tables together. has recessed screws there. Another plastic washer, metal washer, and, another knob. And if I remember rightly, this knob locks the rise and fall mechanism. Right, so now the guard system. And then this piece slides in here to cover the cutter. We're in the home straight now. I'm going to put the back on. I've got four M6 bolts left. Now bizarrely, 3 are 12mm and 1 is 10mm. I checked the parts list and nowhere on the machine is there an M6 by 10, which is slightly strange. It is a bit rusty, and I know some of the ones on the back here went rusty, so I'm guessing somehow a 10mm bolt ended up in their parts list. I've also got 4 foam washers, which again aren't mentioned anywhere in the instructions, in the parts list, so I think, and I can't find any photos of course, I think they probably go in between here to damp any vibration on the back panel. I think the only thing left to go on now is the fence. So there you go, I hope you enjoyed the rebuild process. I found that really enjoyable. I've got one piece left over, which is a 1mm M6 washer, which strangely enough is exactly what I fitted to the safety interlock mechanism. So I'm guessing it's just not in the diagram for some reason. So I've not fitted the blade yet, I'll do that off camera. I want to give it a run for a few minutes, just to make sure everything's seated properly before I go sticking sharp bits of metal in there. Once that's all done and I'm happy it's running fine, I'll put the blades in and then maybe bring you back to see it in action.